are, since the beginning of this year, we've been in a series that we are calling the Kingdom of God, the Kingdom series, and it's counterintuitive. We're learning things that are different than maybe what we've learned before. We're seeing things in a different perspective, and what we've been observing is that even seasoned believers are being challenged. I mean, people that love Jesus, know Jesus, but we're being challenged in the way that we're seeing some things, in the way that we respond, not only to him, but to other people. And we're going to continue in that today. The world often says, by and large, do unto others before they do unto you. You know, watch out for you. But that is 180 from the way that Jesus came and modeled life for us. 180 degrees off of what he did. Luke 6:31 in the Phillips translation says, treat men exactly the way that you would have them treat you. Care for other people and not just be looking out for yourself to make sure that you're not taken advantage of in some way. When we hear things in a message, in a Bible study that are, maybe they're new to us, you need to ask the Holy Spirit to teach you. Jesus said he would guide you and instruct you in all truth. Because if you don't invite him to teach you things that maybe you've overlooked or haven't seen clearly, then quite likely you can discount those things that don't line up with your preconceived ideas. He tells you something, and you just think, well, that can't be. It could be in the area of finances. You know, God's got an economy that is different than ours. He said he'd provide all our needs according to his riches and glory, not according to your good stewardship and your balance sheet in your bank account, but according to his riches and glory. And you can think, well, that doesn't add up. That doesn't make sense. How could I be generous with God and I'm barely making ends meet now? In the natural, that doesn't make sense. But we don't operate in the natural with the Lord. And so we don't want to just reject truth that sounds different to us, sounds new to us. We've been in the Sermon on the Mount. It was Jesus' inaugural message as he brought his flagship message of the kingdom of heaven. And he's teaching us some things that we haven't heard before. And he began that message in Matthew chapter 5 with several bullet point statements that we've come to know as the Beatitudes, which simply mean the blessed life. These are things that are blessings beyond understanding. And what I want to encourage you is to resist the temptation to hear like the Beatitudes and default that into a to-do list. Oh man, these are things I have to do. I have to become poor. I have to be meek and hungry, and I have to do all these things if I'm supposed to follow scriptures. Jesus wasn't giving us a list of things to do. He's saying these are some qualities that will manifest as you embrace a kingdom culture, as you do things the way that I do them, the way that I'm telling you, Jesus speaking. So, blessed are the poor in spirit. He says, even if you're spiritually bankrupt, like you say, I've got nothing I can bring to the table. He says, the kingdom of heaven is yours. You can come that way because of what Jesus did for us. Amen? So it's quite counterintuitive. Well, at our home here, in the home that we used to have in Michigan, we have a koi pond. And some seasons, I don't know what triggers this, but some seasons that little koi pond is filled with pollywogs. I mean, a lot of them. I can pull a 5-gallon bucket of those things out of there. I mean, there's that. It's not consistent, but here in these little tadpoles, they're born into an environment. It's the only one they know. They breathe aquatically. But something happens in the course of the summer, and they go through a metamorphosis, and it's like they're born again into a totally different life where they weren't safe before. Now they enjoy breathing air on land or off on the side of the pond. Born again into a totally different way of life. And again, we're seeing seasoned believers that are just being challenged in the way they've been walking with Jesus as we've been looking at the kingdom and understanding what it said. We saw, for example, 2 believers that were engaged in ministry, but had gotten sideways with each other, these two later ladies, Euodias and Syntyche, and they would rather they'd rather determine who was right and who was wrong than live in harmony with each other. And I don't know if there's anybody listening today that oftentimes finds themselves needing to be right. And the problem with that is, again, simultaneously, you're making someone else wrong. If you have to be right, maybe you just think, well, they have to be less right, but I have to be right. Remember in the garden, there was that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of right and wrong, but that was not the tree of life. It's not a matter of living your life in such a way that you're right, but these gals had just been satisfied with wanting to be right. So we were looking at how the kingdom handles conflict, how a kingdom culture approaches some conflict. We also were looking at the agape kind of love that is extended to everybody, not just to those that are easy to love. It's extended to people who either won't or have no capacity to reciprocate at all. It's an unconditional love. It's not, I love you when you do this, or I love you if you do that, but I just love you. And it stops short right there. I love you. But nothing. It's the unconditional love of God. It's quite different than what we're used to. And so this manifest representation of the kingdom of heaven should show up in a very obvious way. When a person or a company of people are living in a kingdom culture, it should be obvious. It should be obvious if it's absent, because it's not something that is just marginally different. It's totally different. It's a life that places others above ourselves, that serves other people, and that's the life that Jesus came to model. He didn't come to improve a worldly culture and say, I just got to get you to soften up, like the softer side of Sears. No, it's totally different. Serving and caring for other people. And the kingdom of heaven has got a lot of different faces. And Jesus, starting right on that Sermon on the Mount, but throughout his life, spoke many parables that reflect the different faces of the kingdom of heaven. And rather than telling us, okay, here's what the kingdom's going to look like when it arrives, what he's saying is, in these parables, this is what you're going to look like when the kingdom culture is allowed to just develop in your life. This is how you'll start to respond in these areas. I'm going to be in Matthew chapter 1 today, 21, and that's going to be in the main text today, and I'll be in the message most of the time. And Jesus is speaking to religious leaders, the Pharisees, and he says, tell me what you think of this story. A man had 2 sons. He went up to the first and he said, son, go out for the day and work in the vineyard. And the son said, I don't want to. But later on he thought better of it and he went. And the father gave the same command to the second son, and he answered, sure, glad to. But he never went. Which of these 2 sons did what the father asked? And they said, the first, to which Jesus said, yes, and I tell you, we're just reading this, but Jesus is looking at them in the face, and he says, I tell you that crooks and whores are going to precede you into God's kingdom. John came to you showing the right road, and you turned up your noses at him. But the crooks and the whores believed him. Even when you saw their changed lives, you didn't care enough to change and to believe him. Have you ever experienced a day when you came home at the end of the workday and you were just especially hungry? Maybe you had a skinny lunch, maybe you didn't even have lunch. I'm grateful that my wife packs me lunch when I go out to work each day, and every now and then it's the end of the grocery shopping week and it's a little skinny and I come home starving. Grateful but starving. Well, anyway, you have one of those days and you smell some great aromas wafting out of the kitchen and you run in. Is it time yet? Time to eat yet? And maybe the main dish is ready, maybe the side dishes aren't, or vice versa, and it's not time yet. And then comes that clarion call. It's time to eat. Man, you run in there, it is finished, I am going to eat. And you sit down, and in a fraction of the moment, and in a fraction of the time it took her to prepare that meal, you have destroyed that pot roast. and you get up, you thank the chef, push back from the table, and go watch TV. Or maybe not, because it's finished. But maybe you help or offer to help to do the dishes. There's something that for the last actually couple years, I have been moving around on the chessboard in my mind, trying to process how this works, how this fits together with the message of the extravagant grace of God. And part of the pieces that I move around, I think of this young 12-year-old king, Jesus, who said, "Don't you know I must be about my Father's business?" I mean, you're familiar with that, but it's caused me to think, why didn't he say I have to be about my Father's yacht or my Father's timeshare or my Father's bank account, but my Father's business? I mean, why even introduce that kind of term, that working term? I think of the disciples and how all but one gave his life to bring the message of the gospel, martyred. I mean, if it's all finished, if Jesus did it all, like that meal that's finished and I push back, if he did it all, why did these guys give their life? I mean, if it's all a done deal, if you're in, you're in. If you're not, you're not. Why would they spend their life that way? And I think of Paul speaking to his protege Timothy, who he loved. And he tells him, "Study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that needs not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." And I wonder, could not you have picked a more benign word than workman? I mean, study to show yourself studious, a student, a follower, or, why use that word? And we know that the Koine Greek that the New Testament was written in did not have punctuation. It hadn't been created at that time. But our English Bibles have chapters and verses and periods and commas and the like. And so we read what Paul wrote to Timothy, and it says, "Study to show yourself approved unto God, comma, a workman that doesn't need to be ashamed." And with the pause right there, it seems to imply that we have to do something to demonstrate that we're approved unto God. But the fact is that we're already accepted in the beloved. And since that punctuation wasn't there in the original, what if we moved that punctuation that wasn't there? What if it was intended to be elsewhere and had a dramatic change on the whole meaning? Study to show yourself, comma, approved unto God. It changes the emphasis that we are to make sure that we are convinced of our identity in Jesus Christ. We're not trying to show someone else that we've got God's favor. We've already been accepted in the beloved. But we want to make sure that we're convinced of that. A workman. Again, why did Paul choose that word? He loves Timothy. I mean, that could set somebody up. It could set up somebody predisposed to a life of performance, to want to be about doing all sorts of stuff to get God's approval. Why would he use that word? We want to make sure that we understand exactly what God has in store for him. These are the things I've moved around in the chessboard of my mind. Jesus said, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good work and glorify your Father which is in heaven." Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good work. Wait a minute. I mean, this is a finished work message of the cross of Jesus Christ. That was the last thing he said on the cross. It is finished. So why use that kind of language at all? Here's something that I'd like you to get. Probably the main point for today. If you get nothing else, jot this down and think about this, and it will help you out. The gospel of Jesus Christ is not opposed to effort. It's opposed to earning. Don't mistake that. If you look in the New Testament, it is full of energy and effort, people doing things. But Titus 3:5 says it's not by works of righteousness that we do, but according to his mercy, he saved us. You can never earn your right standing with God. That's not how it's achieved. And just like the pollywog that grows up only breathing in water, and then a few months later, he doesn't like to be completely in water all the time, we live and are raised up in a performance culture. Everything we do is rewarded on how well we do it. 2-year-old goes potty and gets M&Ms. Hey, good boy. It just starts young and it goes all the time. The better you do, the better the reward. And then there's a metamorphosis that goes on in our life when we recognize that Jesus Christ paid a price that we could never pay. And that we're suddenly living by what he's done, not by what we do, by what he's done for us, not by what we manage not to do, the things in life that we manage to avoid. Without effort, we'd be nowhere. If we get the message and just walk out and say, well, Jesus did it all. We need to understand what he did. Paul said, take off the old man and put on the new. And there isn't a hint of suggestion that that'll be done for you. We're told, take off the old man and put on the new. Well, our text here that Jesus was speaking described two sons. They're both sons. They're both in relationship with the father, but they conduct their lives in a different way. One says, I don't want to do that. What parent hasn't heard that? I don't want to do that. But he thought later better of it and went and did what his father had asked him. First, the second one, acquiesced immediately. Loved to, glad to, but just never did it. Which one was pleasing? The Pharisee said, well, I suppose the first one, who eventually did what what the Father had asked, I suppose that's the one that's right. But the truth is that both of them failed. Delayed obedience can be the same thing as disobedience. I'm not going to do that. Eventually he went. What we need to understand is that there is no effort that we can put forth that will secure our right standing with God, because that's not how it comes. Again, not by works of righteousness that we do, but according to his mercy, he saved us. We don't do things to garner a relationship with God, to improve a relationship to God, as if somehow or other something we do is going to set us for an upgrade to first class, If I do this, there's a better chance I'll get a better mansion in heaven, and that's not how it works. That's not how God looks at things. We can't earn that relationship. Jesus answered those religious leaders, and this is what he said. Yes, I tell you that crooks and whores are going to precede you into God's kingdom. John came showing you the right road, and you turned up your noses at him, but the crooks and the whores believed him. Even when you saw their changed lives, you didn't care enough to change and believe. The issue wasn't the lip service. One said he wouldn't do it and did it later, and the other said glad to do it and never did it. It wasn't a matter of lip service, it was a matter of believing. Who believed the word? And that's what Jesus was saying to these religious leaders. And so we live in a culture that's been going on for quite some time. Likely your parents were brought up in this, and maybe some of your grandparents even. A culture of believers who are convinced that they have to perform to some certain level of accomplishment in order to be right with God. We are also seeing the emergence of a culture in our days where people recognize that Jesus did it all to him I owe, and they don't have to do anything. We're experiencing a culture of consumeristic Christians. They love Jesus, but it's like, what can you do for me? I've said before, it's like tow truck Jesus. We want you on speed dial in case we get in a mess. But other than that, please don't wrinkle our life and interfere. Just, you're my end game to make sure that I'm okay. And that's not what he wants. Neither of those sons did what the father asked as he asked him to do it. You're never going to earn your right standing with the Father. But once you believe that God's extravagant grace is unearned and undeserved. And you can walk with your head high, no condemnation. Once you get that and embrace it and believe it, something ought to compel you to want to help other people find that truth that'll set them free. They're on a merry-go-round. I mean, you would not stand and watch somebody backing up and going to back into a light pole or a car or something else. You would want to say, hey, stop, before you cause some harm and some damage. So we should be compelled to want to help other people. And Paul, in his earlier days, put forth a message of relationship with God that was put out there like, toe the line. You need to do this. It was the law that he was trained in as a Pharisee. It was a line that he himself couldn't hold. He couldn't accomplish himself. And all you have to do is read Romans 7. He says, "Oh, wretched man that I am." The message of that Romans 7, verse 24 says this: "I've tried everything and nothing helps. I'm at the end of my rope. Is there no one who can do anything for me?" Isn't that the real question? Relationship with God wasn't successful on a list of what you're able to accomplish and what you're able to avoid. Well, this parable that Jesus was saying, putting out of the two sons, there's a companion parable that likely you've heard as well, and it was a landowner who went out very early one morning to hire laborers, workers, for the vineyard. And he agreed with them for a wage. The Message translation said it was $1 a day. And it says that he went back out at 9 in the morning and hired some more. Then he went back out at noon and hired some more. Then he went back out at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and hired some more. And then it says that at 5 o'clock, he went back and he found still others standing around. And he said, "Why are you standing around all day doing nothing?" And he sent them out to work. Their response was, "Because no one's hired us." And he told them, "Go work in his vineyard." And at the end of the day, he called all the workers forward to pay them. And he began with the last one, the ones that were hired at the last moment. And here's how that moment went in Matthew 20, verse 9. Those that were hired at 5 o'clock came up and were each given $1. And when those that were hired first saw that, they assumed that they'd be given far more. But they got the same, each of them $1. Taking the $1, they groused angrily to the manager, "These last workers put in only 1 easy hour, and you just made them equal to us, who slaved all day under a scorching sun." And he replied to the one that was speaking for the rest, "Friend, I haven't been unfair. We agreed on the wage of $1, didn't we? So take it and go. I decided to give to the one who came last the same as you. Can I not do with my own money what I want? Are you going to be stingy just because I'm generous?" Friends, grace is unearned and it's undeserved. And what you see in that particular story is, why would guys hired at 6 in the morning get the same wage that guys that were hired at 5 o'clock in the afternoon? And we need to understand that whatever effort we spend to advance the kingdom of God and the message and see others free, that's a privilege. That's not something that gets us a better seat, gets us a better house in glory. That's not what that's for. That's a privilege. It's a privilege to take the message that has transformed your life, caused a real metamorphosis, and to be able to share that with someone else. It's not standing up and preaching or Bible thumping. It's telling them the good news of what Jesus has done for you. And Jesus closes up his inaugural message that day, the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew 7, and you'll recognize this, he said, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, 'Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, done many wonders in your name?' And then I'll declare to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness.'" You did stuff, but we didn't have a relationship. You practiced lawlessness. Friends, grace is not a lawless gospel. It's a law-free gospel. And there's a big difference. It doesn't mean that you get to understand God's amazing grace and you take advantage of it and you can live any way you want. You can do anything you want or do nothing if that's what you want. But that those rules and regulations can no longer impact and improve your relationship with God. It's gift righteousness. It's not works righteousness. And our redemption is secured by what Jesus Christ finished on the cross on our behalf. We get that part. We understand that part. And until One day when he sends his angels back to just traverse the globe and bring the message of the gospel, it's going to be the responsibility of men. It's going to be our job. Yes, I said it, job. J-O-B. Work, responsibility, privilege. There was a verse that caught my attention quite some time ago. Paul speaking in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, and it's one of those verses you could just read right past, and it doesn't seem to mean a whole lot on the surface. Paul said this, "Let a man so consider us as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God." Stewards of the mysteries of God, a servant of Christ. The message of that verse reads beautifully. But you can kind of pass that by. But the Greek word there that Paul spoke, servants, is the word huperetes, and it was a word picture. And it meant this. It meant an under-oarsman. This is the apostle who took the gospel across the known world at that time and established churches all over the place. And he's not saying, I'm really somebody special. He said, I want people to think of me as an under-oarsman. I'm not steering this ship. I'm below deck, and I'm just pulling every time I hear that beat of the drum. I'm just pulling, and someone else is steering things and taking the direction. I'm not somebody special. I'm an under-oarsman. I want to close with just a couple examples, just in case by chance you thought, I don't really have anything that I can do. I don't really have any significant way that I can impact the kingdom. I'd like to share just a couple things that I thought about early this morning. One day, on the way into church, Peter and John are approached by a guy, a crippled man, sitting there begging for help. And they didn't go like, church in 2 minutes, man. If you're still here on the way out, hit me up. And they weren't even in a real good position to help. They simply said, silver and gold have I none. I don't have 2 nickels to rub together. But such as I have, I give to you in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Rise up and walk. Grabbed him by the hand, pulled him up. And it says he was just spinning around, dancing, happy to do what he was never able to do. And he went into church with them that day. How about the end of that long, busy day when thousands of people had sat on the grass and listened to Jesus? And then Jesus tells the disciples, feed them. And their focus was on their ability or their inability. How can we feed them? There isn't enough money to feed them. There's a little boy here with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, but what are they among so many? They looked at their ability and thought, it's insignificant, but you know that Jesus multiplied that food till everybody had everything they wanted. And when they collected the leftovers, there was 12 baskets of leftovers. More than enough, not just the significant. Maybe you feel today like, I don't have any great talent. I'm not somebody that can do all sorts of things here. I can't teach or sing or whatever. There's not a lot that I can do. But being available and just saying, Lord, I just want to extend this good message. Peter and John had nothing. We have no money that we can give you. What they did changed that man's life forever. He stood up and walked and was able to do what he had never been able to do before. That was life-changing for that guy. Jesus told a story of a guy that fell among thieves who beat him up, stripped him, robbed him, and left him half dead on the road to Jericho. And a priest comes down the road and crosses over like avoiding a Salvation Army kettle at Christmas time. And a Levite comes by and sees the guy and says, half dead. A little more time, he'll be the other half dead. What's the use I can do? But somebody came along and did what they could do, picked him up off the ground, poured in something to comfort him, and took something out of his pocket to give to the innkeeper and said, take care of him. When I come back, if I owe you more, I'll give it to you. He did what he could do to change that man's life. The Bible's full of very wealthy people. If you think that next to godliness, you've got that wrong. Jesus was able to take his band of men for 3 years across the country because there were some wealthy women and people that supplied food and took care of them and enabled them. The Bible's full of wealthy people. But probably the most outstanding offering was one day when Jesus sat in the temple next to the offering and he observed not who put in, but how they put in. And it says there was many rich people that day, and they put in a lot in the offering. It was a good offering that day. But the most outstanding one was this widow who put in 2 mites, 2 little copper coins that added up to be a half a cent. And of her, Jesus said, wherever this gospel's preached, what she did will be told. That's outstanding. Apparently, Jesus looked more at what was not given than what was given, what was withheld. Not the much that was given, but what somebody said, this doesn't amount to anything. I'll just keep this for myself. One day when I was a pretty new pastor, just before service, a young guy, probably 21 or 2, comes in, sticks his hand right out there like a salesman. I'm so-and-so. He says, I'm going to be sitting right down here in the front row. I operate in all 9 gifts. As soon as you open it up, just turn it over to me. To which I said, have a seat. Glad you're here. I'm not going to be turning it over. I don't even know who you are. Thought he had it all to give. I'm grateful for helpful people. People that will do practically anything that you ask them to do to help advance the kingdom. But there are also people with a gift of helps, and they do stuff you don't even know you need done. So you see people that are walking down the hall and there's a gum wrapper or a piece of paper down there, and they just reach down and pick it up instead of saying, whose job is that to get that out of there, you know? Or maybe say, hey, I don't do the bend and snap anymore, but there's people that aren't trying to impress anybody by what they give, what they can do, but people that just have a heart. Somebody shared the gospel with me. I just have a heart to help other people to understand what Jesus really thinks about them so they can jump off that merry-go-round of performance and having to be good enough to be accepted to God. We've built, in my lifetime, I've been privileged to build 6 church buildings. And I remember one time, a little old widow came up. Her and her husband had run a hardware store, one of the little mom and pop type hardware stores. You buy nails by the handful. And we were building this church, and she came with boxes of old screws. She said, here, I hope this helps you build the church. Such as I have. She gave what she could. We built another church building, and there were some grandmas that came out every Saturday and made soup. I want to tell you, that was muchly appreciated. The guys that worked out there all day building this church building on their weekends, they really somebody doing what they could do so that it freed up someone else to do something that this first person couldn't. And that's how the body of Christ works. And there might be parts that don't seem as important. King James says the less comely parts, you know, but the whole body is fitly joined together. So part of a kingdom culture is living a life that doesn't just revolve around us and what we can get and what somebody can do for us, but how we can help.